Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're embarking on a seriously fascinating journey, specifically the hero's journey of the modern economy. We're going to explore the theory and, more importantly, the practice of entrepreneurship. You know, we often think of entrepreneurs just as folks who start businesses, but honestly, they are so much more than that. They're the dynamic heroes of our economy, the catalysts who use this amazing concept of creative destruction to drive society forward, mobilize resources, and generate literally incredible value. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this, using some fantastic insights pulled straight from foundational academic texts and practical materials. Let's get right into it.
So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, we'll be decoding entrepreneurship, then looking at the economic catalyst, figuring out exactly who the entrepreneur is, overcoming key barriers, and finally walking through the entrepreneurial process.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Decoding Entrepreneurship, the Search for Change.
Before we really get into the weeds, to truly grasp this concept, we actually have to look at its roots. The term entrepreneurship comes from the 16th century French word entreprendre, which literally translates to undertake. It represents the whole shebang, the process of identifying, evaluating, and exploiting new opportunities. But you know, it's not just about flipping a sign to open on a storefront. It's really about the willingness to undertake a calculated risk in the pursuit of profit, growth, and entirely new possibilities.
Now notice how the legendary management guru Peter F. Drucker completely shifts our focus here. He defines it as a systematic innovation, which consists of a purposeful and organized search for changes. I just love that framing. Drucker brilliantly moves the spotlight away from just making a quick buck. Instead, he frames the entrepreneur as someone who is constantly hunting for change, right? Responding to it and then exploiting it as a brand new opportunity for economic and social innovation.
Which brings us to the year 1755. This is actually a really pivotal year because it marks the first systematic use of the term by the economist Richard Cantillon. Cantillon saw the entrepreneur primarily as a risk bearer. He painted this picture of a person who pays a certain fixed price for a product right now, but with the specific intention of reselling it at a totally uncertain price in the future. That gap, that uncertainty, well, that's the literal birthplace of entrepreneurial risk.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Economic Catalyst, Fueling Development. So, the absolutely crucial point here is that entrepreneurs act as the ultimate catalytic agent for a nation's economic development. And they do this in a few vital ways. First, they mobilize idle savings and channel them into productive investments, what we call capital formation. They are also massive engines for employment generation, creating jobs both directly and indirectly. Plus, they drive balanced regional development by bringing economic activity to rural or, less developed areas. And perhaps most importantly, they champion what economist Joseph Schumpeter famously called creative destruction. Basically, introducing new tech and methods that disrupt the old and propel society forward.
Okay, Section 3, Who is the entrepreneur? Let's look at the theories and personalities.
Now, the academic history of entrepreneurial theory is super fascinating because the motivations span across completely different disciplines. Economically, like we just saw, Cantillon focused on risk-bearing, while Schumpeter zeroed in on innovation. But check out the sociological and psychological angles. Sociologist Max Weber actually believed entrepreneurship was tied to religious beliefs and the Protestant ethic of hard work and frugality. Psychologically, David McClelland argued it's driven by a high need for achievement, or NAC for short, where people basically crave personal responsibility and concrete feedback. Meanwhile, Everett Hagen argued for status withdrawal, suggesting that groups who lose social prestige turn to innovative business creation to win that status right back. Pretty interesting, right?
Let's clear up a distinction that honestly confuses a lot of people. The difference between an entrepreneur and a manager. There's a stark contrast here. The manager is an employee who maintains the efficient functioning of the enterprise. They bear no personal financial risk, they're motivated by a secure salary, and they make decisions within delegated authority. The entrepreneur, on the other hand, is the owner who risks their very own capital to disrupt the status quo. They are motivated by achievement, and they're the ones making the independent final decisions.
But wait, the corporate world has evolved, bringing us a really cool hybrid concept, the intrapreneur. Coined and popularized by Gifford Pinchot III, an intrapreneur is an employee within a large existing organization who is actually given the freedom and resources to develop new products or processes. So what does that mean? It means you can still have a massive innovative impact even if you work inside the walls of a traditional corporate giant.
Let's compare these two side by side for a second. While both the entrepreneur and the intrapreneur are totally driven by the same innovative spirit, the actual mechanics of their journey are quite different. The entrepreneur operates totally independently, relies on their own capital, and basically bears the full brunt of personal financial risk. The intrapreneur, however, operates within an existing organizational structure. They get to use the organization's capital and resources, which means the organization itself provides a safety net and takes on that financial risk.
Okay, let's actually test this concept right now using a question straight from our source material. Let's see. Question number 3. Who is an intrapreneur? Is it A, a person running a shop, B, a government employee, C, a person who acts like an entrepreneur inside a company, or D, a business investor? Well, based on what we just learned, the answer is clearly C. It's just a great real-world check to make sure we're grasping the distinct roles within the broader business ecosystem.
Which brings us to Section 4, Overcoming Key Barriers, the Trials of the Journey.
I mean, let's be real. These barriers are formidable, and they come at you from all directions. You've got environmental barriers, like poor infrastructure and endless bureaucratic red tape. Financial barriers are massive too, things like a lack of initial capital or crazy high interest rates. Then you have the psychological barriers, primarily that crippling fear of failure, or maybe a lack of self-confidence. Marketing barriers mean facing down intense competition, often without enough market information. And finally, socio-cultural barriers, where someone might simply lack entrepreneurial role models in their family or community. It's a lot to overcome.
Let's do another quick check from the text to reinforce this idea. Take a look at question number 4 here, which is not a problem faced by entrepreneurs. The options are A, lack of capital, B, risk-taking ability, C, poor infrastructure, or D, fear of failure. This is such a brilliant question because it highlights that while a lack of capital, poor infrastructure, and fear of failure are absolutely real barriers, risk-taking ability is definitely not a problem. In fact, that intrinsic risk-taking ability is the exact superpower the entrepreneur uses to smash through those other barriers.
And that leads us to our final section, Section 5, the entrepreneurial process, a roadmap to success.
You know, building a business isn't just about having some sudden eureka moment in the shower. It is a rigorous 4-stage dynamic journey. Step 1 is the identification and evaluation of an opportunity, really scanning the environment to spot a viable gap in the market. Step 2 is the development of the business plan, where you systematically chart out your financial, marketing, and operational strategies. Step 3 is the determination and mobilization of resources, basically actually gathering the capital and the human resources you're going to need. And finally, Step 4 is launching and managing the enterprise, dealing with the daily grind of operations and growth strategies.
But successfully surviving that 4-step process, that requires some very specific behavioral competencies. David McClellan neatly organized these into 3 distinct clusters. First up is the achievement cluster, which demands initiative, an unrelenting focus on high quality, and intense persistence to push through roadblocks. Second is the planning cluster, requiring systematic planning and creative problem-solving skills. And third is the power cluster, which is really all about the ability to persuade suppliers and investors backed by a deep, unshakable self-confidence.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. We've explored the theories, the massive economic impact, the barriers, and the actual process of the entrepreneurial hero. The academic texts show us exactly what it takes, but the practice itself is deeply personal. So, I'm going to leave you with this question. Do you possess that underlying need for achievement? Are you ready to embrace uncertainty, wield the tool of creative destruction, and become the hero of your very own economic story? Take some time to reflect on your own risk tolerance and drive. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.